Hello, good afternoon. Welcome back. Wish you a great afternoon from the enmacc offices here in Munich. We're back with another webinar and allowed for a recovery phase of 2 weeks after the eWorld. I think everyone needed that. We had a blast again. We had, as an enmacc team, more than 500 meetings on eWorld and a party with more than 600 participants. So it took a while to get back in order and recover from these intense days. But thanks to everyone who joined us there, who met the team, and yeah, thanks for the good discussions we had as every year. Today we want to dive deeper again into green power production and incentives in the German market. And as always, our partners from Veyt are our guests today. Daniel joins us not for the first time. I will directly hand over to him for his presentation and invite you already to join in the discussion later on. Use the Q&A or ideally the Q&A functionality of the Zoom software. I will pick up the questions and yeah, try to create a dialogue with Daniel and addressing all your issues and questions you may have. All right, so much for the introduction. Daniel, floor is yours. Can't wait. You're on mute, Daniel. Daniel,
There you go. You can hear
here
me
you
now,
are.
right?
Very good.
Perfectly. The windows were shuffled around a bit. And you see the screen I'm sharing or not
All
yet?
good.
Yeah, all good. And thank you then, Jens, and thank you, enmacc, for hosting me here for this Digital Trade Summit. So as Jens said, we will dive into the role of GOs and PPAs in relation to the heavily subsidized green power sector in Germany. I'm the manager for Renewable Power Certificates at Veyt. And just a little bit before we go into the presentation, for those who don't know, at Veyt we do more than analysis on renewable power. We also focus on renewable fuels, carbon markets in Europe and globally, both compliance and voluntary. And our strength is very much in that we are looking at the interaction of these markets and their interaction in the economy. This is what feeds our analytics and models. And with that said, let's get back to the presentation, which we'll first look at the GO and PPA markets in Germany and the implication of the EEG. We will look at specific policies that drive demand for German GOs and PPAs before we go into the impact of prices on the GO and PPA market. And then I will have a bit of a short tease of our platform, of our PPA product there. But let's go into the presentation first. So to start with, it's always good to get a little bit of feel of the GO side of the guarantees of origin, how it works in Germany. I don't know how many of you come from the PPA or the GOs, or some might not be that familiar. But in short, as many other countries in the EU, it is informed by EU law, which sets some minimum standards on how the GO system should be. And there it mandates suppliers to use GOs for the disclosure of renewable attributes. If they don't do that, they are left with what's left in the grid, so to speak. And that can be a bit of a renewable attributes, but it's contained in what they call the residual mix. But Germany has implemented some particular rules, and one of them is that they restrict the possibility of canceled GOs in the German registry to suppliers. So tracking the full supply chain, you need also to have a contractual based tracking of whatever contracts you have with the end consumer and the supplier. But GOs needs to be cancelled for renewable PPAs, for instance. Another very, very important element to the German system, which they are not alone with, but very few countries have this, is that they don't issue GOs for supported generation. And that essentially results in what you see here in the graph to the left, that there's a there's a large deficit of GOs in Germany if looking at it in isolation. So a lot of GOs are imported, more than 160 terawatt actually, which is more than, or they have a deficiency of that, or deficit, which is equivalent to Norway, which is a big kind of powerhouse in Europe when it comes to the supply of GOs, or has been for many years. And this is not because there's little renewable electricity in Germany. In fact, there's quite a lot. It's more than in Norway, but a lot of it's locked in for the issuance of GOs because they are receiving subsidies under the EEG or support. So of 41 terawatt hours that were issued in GOs that were issued corresponding to power production in 2023, there was 41 of 264 terawatt hour renewable electricity. So it's quite a small share. But as you see in the table to the right, the share is growing. So in particular with respect to wind, which in 2019, there were barely any issuance of GOs from wind in that year. But in 2023, we see 18.6 terawatt hour. And the reason for this is that in general, supported power production receives support for 20 years. So after 20 years, they generally fall out of the system. There is some exceptions. So there are some exceptions on early offshore wind, that was 12 years, but generally it's 20 years. So here on the graph to the left, I'm showing trying to show the correlation between how much was produced in 2020 and then how much was issued 20 years after. And of course, it's subject to weather conditions and so forth that can be different for the different years. But and you see that it's a much lower amount that is issued. And that can also be because of some generation is being decommissioned or the efficiency of power production has decreased or whatnot. So there are several reasons that can result in this. But the conclusion here, what I want to show is that the historical power generation and capacity can tell us something about future GO issuance. And here you see in this graph that what we have so far indicates that we can have a lot of GOs falling out of the EEG in the coming years. And it's essential, I would say, if you engage in this market, to keep on top of this and understand how they fall out. Now, there are generation falling out, but there's also new generation being supported in Germany. But they will need to change the system. The European Union has announced that Germany needs to go more market-based. So under the previous government, there was a consultation process. Now you have a new government. It's been a bit of a turmoil in Germany lately, but that will need to implement this, the new system that they finally will adopt. But they have announced that they will auction certain capacities up until 2030. And here we did a bit of a calculation in the graph to the right to show how much that can correspond in output, giving specific capacity factors that we use under our fundamental power market model. So it could be up to 80 terawatt hours, something like that, give or take, by 2030. So that's on that end. So there will be power generation falling in and power generation that comes in. But we also have other policies that are trying to drive demand. And if looking at auctions, they will not, in Germany, they will not alone make sure that Germany reaches targets. It needs complementary measures. And this is, you can say, one of them, where the state aid scheme for indirect emission costs, which energy intensive industries can get in Germany, those that are affected by the, or indirectly affected by the carbon prices, they can get state aid if they comply with certain energy transition measures. And one of those options is that they cover 30% of the total electricity consumption with renewable electricity, and sourcing GOs, or not directly, but via supplier, is the way forward there. Or they can do it directly if it's outside of Germany. It's a bit of a special rule. But 80% of these, the renewable electricity that they needs to come from Central Western Europe. And in Germany, they need to, as I indicated, it's different rules there. They need to bundle it with the physical flows from the supplier. And there are different ways of that. I will not go into them, but you can do PPAs or other ways. But there are some stricter rules for it. And that can concern quite a lot of electricity, as you see to the graph to the right here. And reaching the targets, the decarbonization targets we have for 2050, the electricity consumption from these sectors affected will have to increase. So with the years, it can actually be higher share, and who knows, maybe they also do some adjustments to the state aid schemes. Another one that we see that is driving in particular the PPA market is the production of renewable fuels of non-biological origin. It's a complex wording there, but essentially it's renewable hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives from electricity production. And that drives the demand for PPAs from new installations in Germany. The previous policy I talked about didn't have any kind of additionality requirement, but this one have. And looking at the German composition of the energy mix, there are two pathways in the table here to the left that can be used in Germany, and that's direct connection or general grid. And for both of those, if GOs are issued, I say if they are issued, they need to be cancelled for this. And in the general grid pathway, you also need to have a PPA with specific requirements on temporal matching, geographical correlation, and so forth. I will not go into that, but the conclusion is that it drives the PPA market from a policy perspective. And that is connected to sectoral targets that you have under the Renewable Energy Directive for transport and industry. In Germany, they have recently announced that they will not have any quota obligations on these sectors for reaching these targets. So it's going to be hard to assess the fair value, I believe, but rather they will use different kind of incentives to drive this transition. And let's see how successful they will be with that. But many are not believing that Europe is at current pace reaching the targets, and our models is not expecting that either. Then there are other aspects that also can drive the growth of GOs and PPAs in Germany. As I pointed out before, there are some generation that is falling out of the system, and you can see that on the graph here to the left, where you see like there's a pickup from Q4 2020 to Q1, and for each year it goes up a bit of the wind that is issued in ratio of the total wind production in in Germany. But in 2022, we saw something special happen. There we saw it picking up even more, which most likely, we would say, and we have heard it from market participants as well, is linked to the increasing prices we saw first in power, but then on the geo side as well. Maybe I should clarify here because it looks a bit weird. It looks like geos are worth more than power in the first glance, but that's because guarantees of origins are depicted in euro cents and power in euros. So obviously, power is the lion's share of the income there. But interestingly here as well, I want to point to is that when the prices went down, we didn't see a massive, like the share or the geo issuance didn't go down that much. That can be partly because new generation is being let out of the EEG, but it can also be that some actors started engaging in long-term or in PPAs, because they were maybe towards the end of their support period anyway. And we saw that in 2023 as well. If we look at the graph or the graph to the right, that in 2023 we saw a record in PPAs when it comes to capacity in Germany. So there you see we have policies, we have prices that are driving these markets. And that's kind of looking in the history, but looking forward a little bit, like and bridging into the short demo I will have. In our PPA product, you can look at contract for different periods. And here we have depicted average PPAs and auction prices, and that for onshore wind and solar. And as you see in the graphs, PPA prices can be quite competitive compared to auctions when it comes to onshore wind. Of course, this is not taking into consideration grid connection costs, but it says a little bit about that power capacity that is falling out of the EEG and how we see the PPA market developing forward. We see this as we believe it's going to grow, actually. Again, this is on average levels. I have deliberately left out the prices, but just as an indicator, for onshore wind, it's almost 84 euros per megawatt hour for a one-year contract. Yeah, but as I mentioned, you can see more on our platform, which I just will briefly show you here. So first, here you have the different components. I've dropped the needle there. You can see all the different assets that are installed for a specific technology. Here it's wind, onshore and offshore wind, but you can also select solar. Wind is a little bit more fun, I think, because you have more parameters there and it changed a lot. But we will not go into all these different parameters you can change there. I just briefly want to show you that you can choose between different contract types, and you can choose different contract periods. And depending on where you drop the needle, let's see if it reads it. It doesn't now. Yeah, it did. And you see the PPA price changing on the right. And just as a final teaser, before we go forward to the Q&A, I also want to just show how our PPA product is expanding to other bidding zones in Europe. But if you want to know more about that or any of our other products, please reach out to me or any of my colleagues. Thank you. And Jens, let's jump into the Q&A.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Daniel. Great content, great overview, and I think a good basis for more questions and discussion. Now, if you look from the highest level on PPAs and GOs on the other side, two policy instruments, if you wish. PPAs get talked a lot about right now, but they are actually very much connected as markets. What would you say is the specific role or the benefits of each of these elements in driving the investments in power, in renewables?
Yeah, so if you look at, so it depends a bit how it links to the policies as well. Like in the German context, GOs have I would say, GOs and PPAs have a quite important role, I wouldn't underestimate it, an important role for that generation that is falling out of the EEG. It essentially adds a bit of sustainability to the system, I would say. Obviously, it is dependent on prices, as we have seen, that can drive it. One thing that I didn't say is that in Germany, you have the option to jump out of the EEG system on a monthly basis if you find that the power price and GO price is more beneficial. But it does add that, and I think it's going to be an important element also for Germany to transition into a more sustainable system. Then what's going to be interesting as well, I find, is how can GOs and PPAs be used to promote new installations? That's going to be new in the German context, and there I indicated a bit in terms of the renewable hydrogen production or RFNBOs. Like, what's the fair value here for the power producer in this? Yeah.
Maybe specifically two areas where the market is connected. Once you mentioned is the switching. You can switch between the systems. The second is this Doppelvermarktungsgebot or Verbot. Do you expect both things to be elements in the new regime, which we are going to have in 27 onwards?
Yeah, I think, as I said, like they have announced that they're going to auction some generation. And I think Germany will follow the same approach. Or decision makers will follow the same approach as they've done. They will not issue GOs for this generation. But what's interesting is, and I think Germany is quite progressive in that sense, they use quite strong incentives for driving or supporting the GO market in a way. And they are innovative also in terms of the state aid scheme, where they have like specific kind of like 80% needs to be from a smaller market. So they use these policies to link to the GO market, and in that sense, supporting what is falling out of the EEG. So they are, in that sense, innovative in creating that sustainable transition.
Yeah. Now, just recently, the Norwegian government basically collapsed because of the issue of energy policy and European or Southern European, specifically German prices driving up prices in Norway. What I haven't heard is the discussion around Germany paying significant amounts for GOs to Norway. This is, I think, for everyone in the market, the obvious topic to tackle here. It didn't rise in this discussion. Do you have insights about potential changes or who's tackling this issue?
Yeah, actually, we are soon to publish, and like one in my team is publishing an analyst update on this, where we actually modeled the impact from before. We had like what happens if Norway exit the GO or the ARB system, and then we had price kind of assessment there or sensibility curves. But now we're also assessing what would the impact be on Norwegian assets. And no surprise there, right? I can give you this without the AU. Prices will crash. And it has a huge impact. And I'm kind of baffled about the discussion, how one-sided it can be sometimes. But we have seen changes in it. But what I find is a bit, and here I'm talking with my own hat here, right? But I find it interesting that Norway in large is free riding a bit. They have also a state aid system, but there they use the location-based approach. Meanwhile, they're just exporting the GOs. So instead of supporting the liquidity in the market, they are just participating it with the supply and then leaving it to. So that I find is a bit sad, but we see tendencies that is a trend, that the trend is breaking a bit.
Maybe shifting on especially specifically on the demand side of the market. As you laid out, it's mostly policy driven and very much tied to industrial demand as well. Are there specific findings or insights you can share on the more residential demand? And maybe a good talking point here as well. I think we learned something from these very high prices of REGOs in the UK just recently, how they have an impact on demand. Could you dive into that deeper?
Yeah, so obviously, like there are macroeconomic aspects to this, also for residential. I don't have specific data for residential uses, but like we see a market that have experienced 2 consecutive years of very high supply, and that has affected the prices. We will see now if that affects the demand side, so the demand will pick up, but that has always happened in Europe. Interesting thing that has happened in the REGO side, as you rightly point out there, where they in the UK have less incentives on the demand side, I would say. At least in Europe it's fragmented, but I'll see way more. But in the UK they don't, and there you had prices going up increasingly high. And our take on that is actually it did that, and then we see the ramification of that now because of corporate bureaucracy. So it takes a bit of time for the marketing department to realize, oh no, if this is what it costs, we're not paying it. It's not worth it, right? So you have that lagged response, and it can be that you tied into contract obligations and so forth. But very much you see the ramification on the REGO side. Now, in Europe, we have never had that situation where essentially all the supply is eaten up, because we always have had this rolling or the cumulative oversupply. So it's going to be interesting, like in our model, based on the policy we see on the demand side, and also that the demand side can grow faster, at least if you disregard, like any demand that comes from electrolyzers with required capital investment in infrastructure. Supply requires infrastructure, apart from Germany, which is a bomb, as you saw. Like there's a lot of potential supply, but the demand can change with a change of policy.
It's mostly driven by that. One element you mentioned, and I'm teasing you a little bit, it's the only page where you had no numbers on. This was the topic of renewable fuels. So tell us a little bit, how much do you what kind of volume do you have in your model? What have you planned till 2030 maybe?
Okay, I'm not going to go into too much there, but certainly like 2030, they are not reaching their targets. It's let's say it's in our model as it stands now, closer to 2040 actually. The 2030 target, or it's in between there. So that's how it looks now. But we do reassess this on a quarterly basis. So we have quarterly updates to our model, the model that feeds the PPA, and also the carbon models and so forth. So it can change, but we'll see. As it stands now, it doesn't look that promising.
All right. Overall, I mean, the role of GOs is to incentivize more build out of renewables. In this sense, where I stumble upon sometimes is this idea of additionality, which gets talked a lot about in criteria to make it more precise. And quite frankly, me as someone operating a marketplace, I don't know what to do with this word. If there's a liquid functioning market, then there is nothing like additionality, where you can really tie one kind of cell of GOs or contract to really the build of an individual project. how do you look at this? And is there any, in your data, any connection which leads us to believe that there's an idea of additionality in there?
Yeah. So in terms of additionality, I would challenge you there a bit. But in Germany, certainly, additionality is a thing, right? That's why they don't issue it for supported, I think. But in other places, I would say additionality is not it for the geosystem itself, but for policies connecting to it. And I don't see, I agree with you, like additionality, it shouldn't be the main issue here, or it shouldn't be the focus here. Like what you need to focus in, like there's two sides on liquidity. It's the supply and it's the demand. And one thing that we see now is that it's not that balanced. Like there needs to be more focused on the demand side, like more demand side in incentives. And we see a trend in that direction. We just hope it's going to continue, right? So it can support prices, because what we need in Europe is not for individual assets to be sustainable, but for the system to be sustainable. And that is very much the essence of the geosystem, I would say. And in Germany, you see that it comes in, like this is going to, mitigate the fall of those falling out of the EEG, or the ideas. But of course, it would be better with higher prices for geos.
Yeah. On our conference in October, we had a discussion when I was a little bit putting out the prognosis that the PPA market is in decline. I got some pushback there from the audience. I think I was right at the end. So we have seen that 24, there was less PPA volume in Europe contracted than in the previous years. So I see this as a very limited tool for really scaling up the build out. But putting this aside, I think what we need is a way of having an incentive structure or a subsidy structure as well, which interacts with the market and still leaves room for hedging, for market interaction, and potentially trading. You showed that there's different concepts around CFDs, which are currently discussed. Do you have a favorite one in there? What do you expect to happen once we switch now, as wished for by the EU, from a PPA, from an EEG system, a subsidy system, to a CFD system?
Yeah, on this, I will probably have to pass and ask you to reach out to my colleague Irina. She's the one who's been digging into the different kind of systems. I don't know which one they're going to go for. What I'm interested in for the certificates team is what's the implication on geos. And that I think is going to be the same for either options that they are using. Yeah.
So the Doppelvermarktungsverbot question is the top question for you, how this is handled in the future, and you expect it to continue, that there's no major change.
No, I definitely suspect that. And also, like, if they were to abandon that approach of so they were to issue geos for supported generation, the market would certainly crash. The market would crash. Like, what the market need is demand side incentives. And I'm just going back to the thing with the additionality here. That's the beauty with the geosystem. You can create a adjacent policy that drives additionality if that's what you want to require for, let's say, energy intensive industry, because they are rewarded state aid, right? Okay, then we want to have that, or not. And those who you don't get that much benefit, then you can have more lax incentives. So I think the geo is actually quite an interesting instrument in how they can provide companies in their own policies, but also governments in shaping their support, flexibility, if they just decide to interact with it, and not like they do in Norway, not interacting with it, but just exporting it.
Yeah. You got a question as well regarding the EU's affordable energy package, which is discussed right now. I think GOs are not explicitly mentioned in there, if I get it right. I've not read every detail, but PPAs are, again, put in there as a major incentive scheme and measure going forward to support the build out. make us more independent and affordable. So let's see how this affects the GO market and if there's some new ideas coming out of these discussions.
Yeah.
Check if there's still some questions here open. I think there's interest better understanding what your product does. Maybe you could do a quick pitch here that everyone who joined it gets the main idea. What is the use case and who should use it?
Yeah. So I just showed the PPA product, right? But essentially there you can drop the needle where you want and get the fair value calculations of different like capture costs, volume risks, the geo price and so forth, and add that to your PPA and essentially use it to inform your investment if you want to invest in the asset or if you want to engage in a PPA. But then on the geo side, essentially what our product do is just helping with transparency there. Like, and it does that on the PPAs, but the geo side is heavily characterized by being opaque, both in terms of market prices and fundamentals. It's a very, in that sense, dysfunctional. It doesn't have that much transparency, but it's functioning anyway.
But there are not many models out there like this, no, who fundamentally try to match supply and demand. Or how's
on the geo side?
How are consumers or traders operating in this market right now? I still have the feeling it's more driven not by fundamental changes, but more by policy changes and reactions, no?
Yeah, it's like, I think often it's a reaction to weather. It can be some updates or fundamentals, because we have seen that often after summer or in summer, it sets a direction for what is going to go in the rest of the year. And we believe that comes down to the fact that by then the AIB, which is the kind of body that aggregate the statistics and distributes it to everyone, it's the hub essentially, they published the cancellation statistics for the previous year. And essentially, you know the rollover then, and also you know how the current year's weather conditions has been. So you know how that affects. So then there you usually see that, which is why essentially now in April, we have linked into the different national registries where we can to get a clear idea on the cancellations early, because we do believe that the low prices we see now in the market is due to the highest certainties in terms of supply, because you have electricity generation there, compared to the high uncertainties in terms of cancellations. So we think that the market is underestimating the cancellations.
Interesting. Very good. Look, great overview. I got as well asked, we just announced that we are getting active in the PPA space, but to put this as well in PPA perspective, there won't be PPAs directly tradable on enmacc. What we will offer in the next couple of weeks is a hedging product where basically capture rates for solar and wind will be made tradable on the basis of an index for solar and wind. That will allow, especially the portfolio players, to offload some of the capture risk, solar risk, if you wish, or wind risk, to other players, other traders who are potentially willing to take it at a certain price. And I think this addresses one of the biggest problems we have right now in the renewable space, the declining capture rates, and they're hard to plan going forward. So that's where we will become active. We are already in the GO market, and we'll follow closely how these things are evolving. So thanks again for joining us today, Daniel. It was great. Let's make this an update, and let's see if the prices finally go up again in GOs. I think everyone is waiting for it.
Yeah. No, I think so too. But the market is still in contango, so that's good.
All right. Sounds promising.
Yeah. Thank you, Jens.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.